You're listening to China Africa Talk.
Jambo, ni Bridget akikuletea kipindi kinachohusiana na China na Afrika.
Vous écoutez le dialogue sino-africain avec Bridget.
Everything China, everything Africa.
Olá, você está ouvindo China Africa Talk com Bridget.
سيداتي وسادتي مرحبا بكم في الحوار الصيني العربي مع بريدجيت.
China-Africa relations are evolving rapidly, and so too is the way their stories are told. For decades, much of Africa has been portrayed in parts of the Western media through the lens of conflict, poverty, and crisis. But a different narrative is increasingly taking shape, one driven by deeper cultural exchange, closer people-to-people ties, and the expanding digital communication between China and Africa. Today, the flow of stories, ideas, and experiences is becoming more two-way. Chinese and African media are not only reporting on cooperation, but also helping audiences better understand a changing Africa, a changing China, and the opportunities created by their partnership. So what role can Chinese and African media outlets play in shaping the China-African narrative? Joining us to discuss this are Professor Liu Baocheng, Director of the Center of International Business Ethics at the University of International Business and Economics, Daniel Arap Moi, a CGTN Africa reporter in Kenya, and Francis Emukele, a journalist with New Vision Media in Uganda. I'm going to start the discussion with you there, Francis. You've been reporting on China-Africa relations from the ground. You've also been to China as well. I remember one time you were on a media exchange program here in China for a few months. What have been some of your observations on China's media presence in Africa?
Thank you so much, Bridget, for this opportunity. It's a pleasure being here. My name is Francis Mukule, and I work with Vision Group as a multimedia journalist. China, in my opinion, being that I've worked in a media exchange program with them, they work so hard to ensure that Chinese message in regards to what is being done in China-Africa relations sink into the people. And these actually present themselves in regards to, in fashions of media partnerships. For example, Xinhua has a partnership with Vision Group, and that way we've been able to exchange content and make sure that people that deserve to see this content get to see it.
I'll move on to you there, Daniel. How do Chinese media narratives on Africa differ from those commonly presented by Western media?
Yes, Bridget, thank you very much for this opportunity. I think there's something that we need to make very clear here to our viewers. It is the fact that the Western media normally takes a look at Africa, from three different perspectives. They look at Africa in terms of a lot of disease burden, a lot of poverty-stricken continent, a lot of war-ravaged continent, which I think this is a narrative that CGTN is trying to correct in the eyes of our people here in Africa. But I also want to mention that there's one thing that our viewers need to understand, that we are not trying to be BBC, CNN, And if you look at our narrative, we are trying to tell the African story from the African perspective. We are not looking at what the West is telling us to compare ourselves to. We are not reporting about how Africa is being ravaged by war. What we are trying to do as journalists in the continent, we are Africans, and we are trying to tell our stories. China has given African journalists the opportunity to tell their own stories from the way they see it, from their very own perspective. And this is what we're trying to do.
Let's continue our discussion there with you, Professor Liu. Professor Liu, you've been studying the presence of Chinese media in Africa. Can you share some of your findings? What are some of the key trends, Professor Liu?
Yes, through our research, we have discovered several changes that is going on with Chinese media presence in African continent. One is the content, because it used to be more of a state-led, the ideological framework, and to introduce more of the institutional construction and how wealth are being distributed through a different set of social systems. But right now, the content is focused more on development and how to identify opportunities to grow both on the national and also on the corporate level. And second, the main driver, it used to be the state-led media expansion. Now it's shifting into a more of a media ecosystem where more of the private sectors, and particularly those legacy media, are now being combined with more of the social media that's at work. And third is that there has been a multi-fabric type of coverage by engaging more of the cultural activities, more of the academic forums, and also policy exchanges, etc. So it's getting far more enriched in that regard. And now we share a lot more on the practical issues as for economic engagement and people-to-people exchange. So we try not to exaggerate certain things like local events or the war going on in the world. So the general tonality is very different to what is going on in the West. Yes, the other issue is that as a TV, we have been losing audience all the way from all the TV networks. So it means that the African people are having more access to multimedia type of information instead of relying on TV. And lastly, I think instead of a one-way delivery of a message, but now it's getting more interactive, and also the more of the audience are being able to participate with their feedback, opinions, and suggestions.
Thank you for that, Professor Liu. Still on you there, Professor Liu. Through what channels and strategies does China disseminate its narratives in Africa? And are there particular regions or countries where this presence is more pronounced?
Yes, we have the conventional one, like the Xinhua News Agency, the CGTN definitely work as a hub of the Chinese information over there. But in addition to that, we also have a very strong commercial operation like Star Times, who are really engaged in multi-fabric the communication with at the government level, at the business level, at also community level, and also they also employ very actively since 1988. Actually, those the internet and now more of the local opinion leaders, etc. Not to mention those online streamers, and they also are there to exchange information with the Chinese partners, and also they are more actually investigative into certain events that may be ignored by those mainstream media. So these are really the ecosystem of the media coverage. As for in the entire Africa, because they are having very different situation, the developmental stages. So therefore, China's media is also showing a diversified approach to different part of the African continent. For example, in the eastern part of Africa, it's more on digital platforms, on the innovation and also business exchanges, etc. On the western part, it's more of entertainment and the public events, etc. In the northern part, it's more of the cultural activities, and also the related with what is going on in the Middle East. And in the south part, it's also more educational and information sharing, and also the more of the local opinion leaders are playing a more active role in the participation of media coverage.
Let's go on to you there, Francis, in Uganda. I would like to hear from you. Shaping narratives is not a one-way thing. And I'd like to know, what role do you think the African media and the African people play in shaping China-African narratives? Maybe we can just start from there a bit.
For me, I would love to first of all point out that the Chinese embassy, for example, in Uganda here, is very cognizant of the fact that using young people to have the narrative shaped is very important. So through initiatives like, for example, there's a current initiative where the Chinese embassy is working with young creative in regards to crafts. So they are supporting them in regards to creating bamboo products. So what happens is that the Chinese government is able to sponsor education of these young people. That is one. And then two, have us, the media, partner with the Chinese embassy to be able to shape this narrative. So we are able to tell this story through the partnership between the Chinese embassy and Vision Group, which is the media house they work for. But that aside, we've also seen partnerships, especially with my media house, like earlier on I mentioned. Xinhua is a very significant partner when it comes to shaping this narrative with Vision Group, whereby we have consistent information sharing. So in a way, New Vision in Uganda, for example, stays ahead of very many media houses in Uganda in regards to the news happening between China and Africa. That aside, after my visit in China for the 6 months, 2 years ago, we managed to create a connection with our partners at CIPCC, where we were able to collectively create a social media platform where China-Africa relations are being communicated. So we're able to share sort of like a symbiotic relationship that in which we are in to, leverage social media to be able to shape this agenda. Additionally, there are schools here, for example, the Confucius College here in Uganda. They have YouTube channels where they're able to communicate information, to the rest of the world, especially in Africa, in regards to how to learn Mandarin, but also a Chinese agenda and people-to-people exchange, which is happening on the digital platforms, which is a very significant mode of communication and creating connections, leveraging today's new media, like Professor said earlier on.
I was also asking that question also because a lot of people would then say, oh, well, it's up to Africa to also play a part there. You need to chip in a lot as well.
Yeah, and we're definitely trying our best to be able to have many young people participate in this. For example, what we're doing, for example, at Vision Group is to, for example, if there is a project at the Chinese embassy or there's a Chinese story, we prioritize so much to make sure that young people take part in telling these stories. So you have a lot of young journalists, being hired or, commissioned to go and tell these stories, Chinese stories within Uganda and sometimes out of Uganda. So it's very, very important.
All right. Okay. Daniel, from your perspective, how do audiences in East Africa, particularly in Kenya, perceive Chinese media today?
Well, first of all, to answer that question, I'll begin by saying that we all understand that China does not interfere in the domestic affairs of African governments.
That's right.
So that must be said clear that that is not what China is in Africa to do. Now, to answer that question, I will begin by mentioning one thing. China has been very productive when it comes to working with African governments. It's not that the target is African governments. No, it's about the development of the African continent. We all understand just recently when we're at the African Union, China just announced that starting May 1st, all the 53 African countries will send their products to China duty-free. Now tell me about that. Is that targeting the African governments or targeting development within the continent? So to me, China is much more focused in seeing a win-win situation for the African people and African governments. China has had very good relations with all the African countries, and what they're trying to do is to make sure that Africa works together with China. China is no longer a lender, as many people think in the past. China is now a teacher to Africa. I'll give you a very good example. There was a time I went to Malawi to cover a story, and we went to rural Malawi and visited a family, and we found this family watching Star Times. And this family just wasn't watching Star Times. They were watching a documentary that airs every week. And this documentary is about rice farming. So what the family was trying to do is to learn from Chinese farmers how to grow rice. And I was surprised. I was like, wow, this is life-changing. So I interviewed the gentleman, and this is what he told us, that, in the past, I never knew how to grow rice, but through Star Times, now I am able to grow rice and put food on the table for my family. I was excited. I was like, well, this is life-changing. So such programs are actually helping African people to learn better skills on how to survive. Because in the past, Africa was just known for, wars, diseases, and all that, poverty all across. But China has made sure that majority of our people get out of poverty. We are trying to learn from China. How did China move our people away from poverty? And this is what we are trying to learn from China. So the target has never been African government. The target is our people. How do we trade together? How does Africa trade with China so that we move together? And this is something that the West does not want us to do. Majority of people that watch Western media will not focus on developing Africa. China is helping us in infrastructure development. Here in Kenya, we have one of the biggest solar power plants in Garissa, the biggest in East and Central Africa, which was constructed by China. These are development aspects that China is bringing across Africa. So to me, when I look at China, I look at a partner of Africa that does not want to leave the people of this continent behind, but a partner that wants us to move together hand in hand for progress. We are trying to find ways of developing together. We can learn from China because China is way experienced technologically. I mean, you talk about AI today. The entire world looks up to China because they are way ahead of us. So learning from them will help us to manage our own development agendas. How do we have good proper infrastructure development? How do we have hospitals? All these are things that China is trying to help us as Africans do. Another example was in the Gambia. In the Gambia, we visited a bridge that was broken, washed away because it had been there for years. The health centers were across the river. So majority of pregnant mothers would come and stop this side of the river because they can't cross. There are no boats. Many mothers would actually have some have actually died because they cannot cross to the other side to go and give birth. And when we asked some of the mothers, they said China came to our rescue. They built the bridge. Now mothers can be rushed very quickly through ambulances to go and get treatment across the other side. Tell me, Bridget, is this not development for a continent that really needs this badly? Should we say that this is something that is not well thought of, focused to help our people to also have good healthcare systems, to have good infrastructure development? If you speak to people who have experienced all these things within the African continent, then you get the real picture. But if you ask someone, of course, who has never heard of, a road being constructed in Ethiopia or somewhere in Malawi, they will not know. They will tell you anything. But if you ask people that have actually seen it, you get the correct answer. So I really think that what China is doing is great for the continent. And we just pray that we continue with the same spirit to see Africans also benefit from good infrastructure, good healthcare, clean running water, just like the rest of the world.
Thank you for those beautiful insights there, Daniel. Moving on to our discussion, Professor Liu, in your view, what more can be done to enhance China's national image in Africa, especially in areas such as public diplomacy, development cooperation, and people-centered initiatives like health, education, and sports?
Yeah, I want to respond what Daniel has described. That's really a very touchy story, which are really real. And the Western media narrative is normally to view stuff with a cold eye in a bystander type of position. But Chinese media is there to observe stuff with a warm heart. Also, they build dialogue between their host government and also the home government to see what can be done to be improved. So that's the major difference. The other is that the Western government normally would like to see, okay, your local government needs to improve your transparency and efficiency before I can be there to help. Otherwise, the money will not be allocated right, and that's going to be obstructive to the objective. But for China, let's do it from the bottom up and see how people are really impacted by my efforts. And gradually, so this will be able to impact a larger circle and even the political circle to see, what really people want and how improvement can be made. So these are really different approaches. As for your question as what can be further done to improve the media narrative from the Chinese perspective, one is, of course, we continue to exercise our strategic advantage to build more connectivity in their telecom with the 5G network. So because that's the basis for the infrastructure support that can really stretch to more corners of the African continent. Second, we also need to have more of investigative reporting so that I would like to see more of the Chinese journalists could really spend months with a community, and not to mention with the fives like Lion, etc., to study the real and the detailed part of life in Africa, so that they can really build a echo chamber with the African people. And then more of the micromedia can really be coordinated so that they have sort of a same type of message as how they can really be constructive in bringing about practical solutions to certain issues. It's not only about to inform, but rather to help and engage. So this is also very important. Third is that we need also to study more into the different type of African cultures across different the world. For example, the Ubuntu culture, how that's going to relate to the Chinese Confucius culture, and how the Islamic world are really behaving differently, but they also have the same heart and also same ambition to grow. And so instead of taking a surprise over the diversities, but rather how they can really coexist and identify strategic synergies with different cultures, with different norms, so that we can work more seamlessly with each other. And also multi-tier dialogue also needs to be taking place. FUCAC is one outstanding example, but on daily or weekly, monthly basis, and how different institutions, different constituencies can continually engage with each other, particularly, with the media, engage with think tanks, with the opinion leaders. And these are really the approach to really improve the ecosystem of media coverage.
Francis, in Uganda, are there media initiatives that are led by Chinese residents or diaspora communities that produce locally tailored content? If so, how influential are they? Maybe we can just take a look there.
Well, I think right now the approach that is working for China or China-Uganda relations in regards to media is collaboration. And that's specifically in regards to working with the leading media houses in Uganda. So in many cases, you find that China or the Chinese embassy is partnering with either Vision Group or Daily Monitor or Nation Media or Next Media to be able to, to collaborate together in exchange of information. But the other thing that is also really being done is the exchange programs, the media exchange programs that China is currently doing in Uganda here. I believe that is one of the ways they've been able to, to have media practices and media collaboration between Uganda and the rest of the world in regards to China.
Okay. Daniel, I first got to know about you, Francis and Daniel, through media exchange programs and when you often come here to China. I just want to know from you, Daniel, how would you assess the role of the cultural and journalism training programs in shaping media narratives between the two regions?
Yes, I think in the past, many African journalists did not have this opportunity to have people exchange, especially journalists going to China, learning about China and coming back to tell the story in a different way. I have been able to visit China 2 times now, and every time I have gone to China, I have come back with a different perspective of how to look at my continent, Africa. I have learned so much while in China that when I come back, the stories that I tell are no longer the kind of stories that I used to tell before. Because every time we've gone to China, we are taught different things that we never thought that really happens.
Okay.
Well, for example, when I was last in China, we were doing stories, but this time my producer taught me something different. How to do much more of what we call vlogs today. And that is something that we were not doing here in Africa. But when we came back and started doing vlogs, it's more interactive with people that you're talking to. They understand you well, away from the traditional reporting of stories. You stand, you do a piece to camera, and that's it. But this learning has helped us, to improve more of how we report our stories now, to make people understand exactly what the stories you're talking about. And of course, we've also been able to learn the cultural aspect. I will tell you, the first time I was in China, I think Professor knows this, I ate something called stinking tofu.
Oh, yes. It actually tastes nice. It tastes very nice, especially the one from, I think, from Changsha. Yes.
Yes, I was actually in Changsha. That is where I tested it from. It is amazing how culture can influence, the workings of people. So I was able to come back and sieve through what I was able to learn. And of course, when you come back, you do stories like vlogs. Your other colleagues will also adapt the same. So this is now the new direction that we are taking. And secondly, we are now going much more into the digital world. So we are looking at our digital team, breaking these stories fast. Because remember now, as Professor mentioned earlier, today people don't have a lot of time to sit and watch television in their living rooms. A lot of people are on the go. So these exchanges have helped us, to learn how to do digital reporting now that we are concentrating so much this year. That is one of our key targets as CGT in Africa, that digital first. We are not going to wait for people to get back to their living rooms to watch TV. We are going to have digital run the stories fast. So these cultural exchanges have really influenced the way we report our stories. While I was there, people in China are so lovely. Mingle with them, you interact with them. They are wonderful people. I have been able to eat their food without any problem anymore. Up until now, we still eat Chinese food. So these exchanges have really helped.
You missed the Chinese food.
This year, I wasn't there for the 2 sessions. But yes, Bridget, yes, we are really grateful that we have these discussions and we really pray that we continue having more of such.
Thank you there so much, Daniel. I'll end the discussion there with you, Professor Liu. In what ways do Chinese telecommunications companies influence the future of communication in Africa, including digital broadcasting, internet provision, and mobile internet markets?
I think one supporting attitude is really what type of value the Chinese media can really carry to Africa. It is really the level of respect and also the level of sincerity together with the integrity that's going to move with our African partners, without which you don't really earn the level of trust. So second is really the creativity. Right now, Chinese media are also engaging more in co-production and co-creation of the content, which is very important in really having the Chinese also audience to really to hear what is going on and what would be the ideal position that our African partners need to engage with China. What are their concerns? What are their priorities in a cascade analysis? The other is that media attention can only be there to reach out only when people really engage with you and feel the interest to know about you. So with more of the economic presence, infrastructure presence, and more of the Chinese diaspora presence in Africa, so definitely people will be aroused with more of the curiosity and also for the exploration of new opportunities to engage either on cultural or economic activities. And then in my university, we have over 1,000 African students. Most of them are all on government scholarship. They will be the new cohort that's going to cultivate the understanding and the collaboration between China and Africa. They do not only taste the stinking tofu, but they have a taste a whole lot more of many other cultural stuff, many economic activities, and also they build their classmate, the friendship, so that they can really have a shared community on both cultural and also on trade and investment collaboration.
Well, that brings us to the end of the discussion there, gentlemen. Professor Liu Baocheng, Francis Mukule, and Daniel Arap Moy, thank you so much for your insights there.
It's a pleasure being here. Can do it again and again. Bridget, let me just note something small as we go.
Sure.
I think
sure.
If we really want to leverage in the African audience and the markets in regards to information sharing, I think going forward, China should also look at bringing in African influencers to be able to push the story forward again.
Okay.
Yeah, social media influencers.
It's got to be a two-way traffic. Yes.
Yeah, there's got to be a two-way traffic.
Yes. Confucius normally mentioned about benevolence, by giving people with a generosity, but right now I think it's more the key value should be respect. So respect is really based on understanding on both sides so that we can really have the more fruitful engagement.
Definitely.
Listeners, you can subscribe to our online newsletter on CGTN or Substack to get more insights on China-Africa relations. Just search China-Africa Talk. For now, it's goodbye.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others. Post it on social media or leave a rating and review. Thanks again. See you next time.